Good morning, YouTube. Welcome to the channel. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for liking the videos. Thanks for listening. Keep coming back. Starting a new book, The 10 Commandments by Laura Schlessinger and Rabbi Stewart Vogel. The 10 Commandments, the significance of God's laws in everyday life. I'm going to skip the acknowledgments and I'm going to start at the preface and then the introduction and then move on to chapter 1. Everybody knows the 10 Commandments, right? Let's see. There's something about stealing, lying, murdering. That's only 3. More people claim to live by the 10 Commandments than seem to know what they specifically are, let alone what they really mean. Well, why should they? How important are they anyway? This is the modern world, and those biblical events, ideas, and stories are from an ancient time. How could this possibly be of much value in this jet-propelled nuclear era? Each day we make innumerable, seemingly minute decisions about things that don't really seem earth-shattering. So what if we broke a promise? Lots of promises are broken, and people get over it and get on with it. So what if we find passion in another bed while we are... So what if we find passion in another bed while we or they are still married? We're entitled to derive pleasure and self-fulfillment. So what if we are too focused on work, TV, or clubs to spend time with family? No one has the right to tell us what to do. So what if religion is not a big deal in our lives? Religious types are all hypocrites, and God is a silly myth for the weak. And God is a silly myth for the weak. When one adds up all the so whats, one ends up with... Pages sticking. One ends up with life without direction, meaning, purpose, value, integrity, or long-range joy. What too many people haven't learned about the Bible is that it's filled with wisdom and direction for all ages to elevate our lives above mere frantic animal existence to the sublime levels humanity is capable of experiencing. I first met Rabbi Vogel in 1995 when I began my religious journey, culminating in my whole family's conversion to Orthodox Judaism in 1998. Our decision to write about the 10 Commandments stems from our common passion from the Bible and our desire to share the Judeo-Christian values derived from it. Although this book has been a collaboration, we argue over scripture with panache. I have used the first person singular in order to avoid the confusion of multiple voices and in some cases to distinguish issues that are of particular importance to me. This is not meant as a biblically exhaustive academic tome. This is a modern update and popularization of the words of God. In the 10 Commandments, we will take what seem like straightforward and succinct expressions, you will and you will not, and expand them to their fullest conceptualizations to demonstrate how, through their application, your life can be made more satisfying, meaningful, directed, moral, and even holy. This book is filled with ideas, emotions, and humor. It will touch, move, enlighten, inspire, sometimes frustrate, educate, and entertain you. You won't be able to look at even mundane moments in your life in exactly the same way. After reading this book, you will stop and think about the right thing to do. Although you might at that moment feel annoyed at the challenge coming from your soul and psyche, you will ultimately feel enlightened and elevated, we promise. Dr. Laura C. Schlessinger, June 1998. Introduction. God, I'd like you to meet Laura. Laura, this is God. Believing in God is a relatively recent experience in my life. My father, born a Jew in Brooklyn, New York, never mentioned God, religion, or Judaism, except for one all-encompassing criticism of the Jewish Passover service. He said how at a very young age he walked out of his parents' Passover Seder celebration screaming that he wouldn't celebrate the homeless slaughter of Egyptian children. Boy, that is terrible, I thought, and that subject, or anything about Judaism, for that matter, was never discussed again. Imagine my surprise when some 40 years later, while attending a Passover Seder in a synagogue, we got to the part where the 10 plagues are recited, culminating in the depth of the firstborn of Egypt, and we dipped a finger into red wine and dropped onto a plate those symbolic tears of compassion, sympathy, and anguish from the Jewish people in response to the suffering of the Egyptians. Imagine my anger at my father when I came to learn that the Exodus experience was a story of redemption of a people from bondage into a covenant with God to bring to all peoples his character and desire for universal love and ethical behavior, and not, as my father had negatively and summarily condensed, a 4,000-year magnificent history, a study into barbarism. My mother was born in Italy to a Catholic family, met my father as he participated in the U.S. military's liberation of northern Italy, and married him at the end of the war in 1946. Her only contribution to my religious training was that American Catholics take it all more seriously than Italians, and that she hated the priests because, as they walk around well garbed and fed, the people starved. Once, when I was an adolescent, my parents asked me if I believed in God. Of course not, I said with assuredness. That's Twilight Zone stuff. Remembering back now, they seemed surprised. I have to wonder why, when one parent told me God is a sadist and the other parent that men of God are selfish and greedy, there was no conversation about God or prayer, no worship, and no observances. Probably realizing that they had made a mistake, or because they felt they were missing something in their own lives, my folks decided to do something religious when I was about 16 years old, compromising their different faiths, backgrounds. They signed us up at the local Unitarian church. I remember my confusion between the weekly service literature extolling the virtue of no dogma or commandments, while the choir sang beautifully about Jesus Christ. The Unitarians taught that there was beauty and truth in many traditions, and believing in God or Jesus as divine was optional. I had the same reaction to this smorgasbord of tradition that I had when a restaurant would overfill my plate with food I couldn't really identify. I lost my appetite. It is not that I led a life without morals and ethics. My parents taught me what was right and wrong. Wrong was sassing your mom and dad, using bad words, lying, cheating, stealing, disobeying authority types, coming home late, or misrepresenting where I was or what I was doing, hurting someone's feelings, smoking, drinking, doing sexual things, and so forth. What was the authority behind these rules? I could be arrested by the police, be hated by friends, or get spanked by my father. The authority behind the rules was the consequences, which would eventually cause me pain, regret, and unhappiness. Fear is very motivating, but only for a while. As I grew older, the influence of literature about heroes and ideals, the reinforcement of concepts of virtue at school, and the reminders by my parents that goodness and decency are their own rewards supported my rising above most temptations that the freedom of living in a college dormitory provide. I wanted my parents to be proud of me, and I wanted people to like me. These were my motivations to be good. Now for the complications. Even many nice and popular people don't always like you, and when you won't go along with cheating, it's no big deal. Laura, it's not a subject in your major, it's just an elective. Drugs, come on, Laura, it's a great feeling. Don't be such a drag. Sex. You're not going to be popular with the guys, Laura, if you're such a prude. Cutting classes. Oh, Laura, stop being so compulsive. Learn to loosen up and have some fun. Or protesting. We have a right to stop the university from functioning if they're not doing something our way or giving us what they want. Consequently, I wasn't in much with the in crowds. It wasn't as if all or even most of my college chums were bad. The freedom afforded by being away from home gives opportunity for experimentation away from parental authority, mostly out of view of university authority and in the company of others who are supporting the notion of individual choice, taste, preference, desire, values, and decisions, yet somehow mixed into this brew is the notion that the folks before us just didn't know what we know or have the ability to appreciate life as we do. Talk about perpetually inventing the wheel. The next complication was the realization that my main authorities, mom and dad, were imperfect, inconstant, sometimes troubled, and oftentimes very difficult. This weakened the notion of concerning myself with their pride in my activities. Nonetheless, I was still fervent in my determination to be decent and good. For me, this was an internal status symbol. I used the basics as a format, no cheating, stealing, and so forth, with the caveat that my intelligence permitted me leeway in interpretation and execution of these ideas. In other words, I discovered rationalizations. Rationalizations include notions of superiority, I know what I'm doing, arrogance, I can handle this, it won't be a problem, elitism, I should have this leeway because I do special things, stupidity, this is really no big deal, it's just an experience, foolishness, this really has no impact on who I am. Short-sightedness, my future will not be impacted by this. Selfishness, if you can't handle it, it's your problem, not mine. The universal experience of youth is to struggle between acceptance of authority with its rules, regulations, and attitudes, and the energy and excitement of what seems to be the first and only discovery of the true essence and meaning of life. In prematurity, that essence is focused on the self and sensuality, limitless freedom, perpetual want and desire, impulsiveness, confusion over personal identity, and painful ignorance about the meaning of it all. Although the scope of my upbringing afforded me more than enough discipline to not cross over that often or that far, I do have regrets and shame. To some extent, the heavy, uncomfortable presence of those regrets in my soul and mind, together with my deepened appreciation and reliance on godly authority, helped focus my radio program during the last half-dozen years. I am especially trying to help young folks minimize the occurrence of such historical self-disappointment and the sometimes terrible or difficult consequences by introducing and reinforcing the morals and values they ought to have received at home. These values aren't reinforced in general society, and they are unassailable by rationalizations, God's commandments. I am still trying to figure out when and how I took that leap into an acceptance of God. Even yesterday, I asked my husband, who has known me for a quarter of a century, if he ever would have guessed that I would have become religious. He said never. Excuse me. In fact, I'd always been slightly condescending but polite to anyone on or off the radio who professed a relationship with God. I would never permit God or religion, especially Bible quotes, to be mentioned on my program. That had left me with the question of who or what is the authority behind my positions and answers. That authority would come from a combination of I'm the one with the microphone, I'm smart, I'm a licensed psychotherapist, I'm a college professor, I'm an author, I'm the one they're calling up, I'm insightful, I'm right because it's the way I think I'd do it, I'm speaking divinely commanded behaviors without realizing it, I'm rational and can figure stuff out, I'm confident in my positions, I'm older and experienced in life, I'm into the literature of philosophy and psychology, I'm successful with what I'm doing, therefore it must be right. This is all worthy, this is all necessary, this is not sufficient. I felt something was missing personally and professionally. I came to what that was through my son Derek. When Derek was born, neither my husband, Episcopalian, Episcopalian background, no religious practice or belief, nor myself, you already know. Episcopalian background, it came to me. No religious practice or belief. I'll start back at this is all worthy, this is all necessary, this is not sufficient. I felt something was missing personally and professionally. I came to what that was through my son Derek. When Derek was born, neither my husband, Episcopalian background, no religious practice or belief, nor myself, you already know this part, was religious. We worried about We worried about that for our son, but figured that he was too young for religion to matter and we had time to figure something out. Of course, we did nothing. One rainy Sunday, Derek, then about 6 or 7, and I were channel surfing. My finger froze on the remote turner when the visual image appeared on our TV screen of scores of naked women holding their equally doomed babies huddled along the ridge of a deep pit in the earth, waiting for the Nazi soldiers' bullets to end their fear. My son's mouth opened in amazed horror. He and I heard Elizabeth Taylor's voice as one of the young children calling out to her dead mother that she couldn't breathe because her dead mother's body was squashing her in the pile of bodies. I was in shock, as I was every time I saw Holocaust footage, but more intensely so because my son was witnessing something incomprehensible to him, to anyone of conscience. "Mama," Derek screamed out, grabbing me, "what is happening?" "Honey," I tried to say calmly, "those are German soldiers in World War II murdering mummies and their babies." "Mama, why are they doing that?" "They're evil." "Who are those women?" "The women and children are Jews." "Mama, who are Jews?" "Derek, the Jews are our people. You are a Jew." "What is Jew?" "You know, Derek." "I really don't know. I am going to study up and tell you as I find out." We spent the rest of that weekend crying and holding each other. That was some way for my son to be introduced to religion. Now, according to Jewish law, neither myself, born of a Jewish father, but not a Jewish mother, nor Derek were Jewish. We did have Jewish blood through my father, through some inexplicable emotion. I had always felt a Jewish connection. I just didn't know what it meant. To me, my son and I were Jews, and those were our people. Jewish law may not have accepted that, but Hitler would have. I made my promise good to my son. I started study, prayer, and practice were my eventual movement toward God. The first time we entered a synagogue, I had to leave because I was overwhelmed when they took out the Torah and held it up for the congregation. I stood in the parking lot, not quite understanding why I was crying my eyes out. It seemed to be incredible that I was part of a 4,000-year history of something so magnificent and special, the world's introduction to God's relationship with people. My son started Hebrew school. My husband and I went through a conversion course at the University of Judaism, Los Angeles. Derek and I converted through the conservative program. After my husband finished his studies, Derek, and I converted together in an Orthodox ceremony. We're planning on Derek's bar mitzvah in Jerusalem in 1998. I can hardly stand the wait to touch the soil of Israel and to link our son to the nation of priests. If there was one moment of revelation that awakened me to God and Judaism, it was the reading of Exodus 19:4-6. The Israelites are camping out at Sinai some 3 months after leaving Egypt. God calls Moses up the mountain and tells him, "You have seen what I did to Egypt, and that I have borne you on the wings of eagles and brought you to me. And now if you hearken well to me and observe my covenant, you shall be to me the most beloved treasure of all peoples, for mine is the entire world. You shall be to me a kingdom of ministers and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel." Reading this virtually took my breath away. I had spent my whole life trying to find meaning in being the good kid, in doing well in school, in being intelligent, and being successful. Though it was all important, it didn't fill some special empty space where meaning needed to be. Realizing that I had a God-mandated responsibility to represent His character, love, and ethical will was the meaning I had been searching for. Rather than as metaphor, I take the covenant at Sinai as real and true. This does put me at odds with some contemporary Jews, for who Judaism is more a people and a culture than a people of the covenant. However, without my firm faith and belief of a whole people experiencing God directly, I wouldn't be able to believe in God at all or accept God's authority over the world and me. I am moved to faith because the covenant between the people of Israel and God is evidenced by the continued existence of the Jewish people in spite of thousands of years of almost continuous attempts to eliminate them by great and powerful cultures which have themselves become extinct. The covenant making Jews the chosen people has been misunderstood throughout the ages. The Jewish understanding of chosen does not mean favorite child or teacher's pet. To be chosen is not an issue of specialness. It is an issue of accepting serious responsibilities. The Israelites were basically given an assignment. By their adherence to a unique way of life with laws of holiness, justice, generosity, mercy, ethics, and compassion, the whole world would come to know, love, and obey the one and only God. The Jews were to be role models, and their behavior in personal and public life as commanded by God would draw others to follow, ultimately resulting in God's kingdom on earth. God loves all people. We are all made in his image. The task of the Jews was not and is not to make Jews of all the world's peoples, but to bring to everyone the knowledge of the presence of God and basic values commanded by God as a blessing. And all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. Genesis 12:3. Once I had absorbed the significance of this religious purpose, my lifestyle, level of happiness, satisfaction, and state of mind and heart changed dramatically. When interviewed recently for a newspaper magazine section, the journalist commented that my friends all said I was a hard worker and were pleased at my doing so well. I found myself silent, which confused me for a moment, since, after all, that was a compliment. I should show pleasure. Instead, after about 20 long seconds of cogitation, I said that before I became a serious Jew, hearing that I was doing well would have been a wonderful compliment and relief. But now, with my motivation coming from quite a different place, I would only feel complimented by the phrase doing good. Being successful is something I've worked hard at and earned, and it is gratifying. The respect, opportunity, and financial compensation are wonderful. If I felt I were successful without doing something of meaning or value, it would be an empty victory indeed. Going up a rating point is of little interest to me compared with the joy I feel when I meet a family in public who gives me some credit for their joy in staying home with the children, saving the marriage, or giving up a bad habit like drinking. That is my new non-secular measure of success. My new joy comes with major obligations and responsibilities. Even the most noble ideals of thoughts, words, and deeds are meaningless when they stay philosophical or symbolic in nature. It is in the everyday that we give meaning to ideas and ideals. That's why rituals are so important. For example, Jews are to put a mezuzah on their front doors. Inside the small tubular artistic case is a small scroll of parchment on which are written two biblical passages. Deuteronomy 6:4-9. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And Deuteronomy 11:13-21. And if you will carefully obey my commandments, ... Excuse me. Now you might wonder, what is the point of bothering to hang up this object? Although they are often pretty, they are not for decoration. Although they house the words of God, they are not good luck charms. Though I do not have the arrogance to presume knowledge of God's reasoning or purpose for each of his commandments, my humble guess would be that the mezuzah's purpose is as a reminder. Tipping your hat to a lady is a reminder of respect. Saying please before each request is a reminder of humility. Saying thank you after each gift or blessing is a reminder of gratitude. Blinking your car signal before each turn is a reminder of your concern for the welfare of others. Saying grace before and or after each meal is a reminder of your love of God and God's for us. Without these reminders, we can too easily become crass and self-centered. These ritualized acts give us the opportunity to become more holy in our purpose and closer to God. That's why I keep kosher, special dietary laws explained in Leviticus. Observe Shabbat, the Sabbath. Have our child in Jewish day school, attend services, support my synagogue, read religious materials, pray, and try my darndest to obey God's commandments. Now, I always say that I'm a serious Jew, not a perfect Jew. I worry about people who get so into the form of rituals that they stop living the meaning of the rituals. The meaning behind the rituals is to aspire toward holiness in the image of God, not perfection, for God is quite well acquainted with our human imperfections and occasional accidental or intentional misuse of free will. I have always considered myself a rational, scientific, and intellectually oriented and independent person. It may seem an odd leap for someone like me to accept external authority, especially without specific explanations from God on his motivation for each commandment. I have discovered that although we do gain wisdom from the exercise of analysis and discourse on God's commandments, we gain character from our decision to obey in spite of our limited human capability to understand. Science can explain the what, only religion gives the what meaning. Perhaps pure reason will never be able to demonstrate scientifically the existence of God and the immortality of the soul. When Moses, Exodus 19:3-8, put before the Israelite elders the concept of covenantal covenantal relationship between God and his people, the response is not, wait a minute, what's the deal? The response is, everything that God has spoken we will do. Exodus 19:8. The immediate and unequivocal reaction is the acceptance of divine authority based upon the love and gratitude of the Israelites for their redemption from Egyptian bondage. In life, a higher idealism and a more profound, just, and consistent morality is only found through the commandments. My life has focus, purpose, and meaning. I feel a part of something more important than my daily experiences might indicate. That is, that my actions and being have significant past that my actions and being have some significance past my personal joy and or pain. I don't feel so alone anymore. I feel as if I am part of a bigger picture, and if I don't always see it or get it, I feel more able actually to help folks who call in or listen to my radio program where I preach, teach, and nag. I can offer them a plan, God's purpose, a way, God's commandments, and a goal, God's holiness. My family life has a focus above and beyond creature comforts, needs, and desires. I have some deeper friendships because of shared, though different, religious interests and involvements. I have a more fair, just, and consistent framework upon which to make moral decisions. I have discovered the inherent peace in that acceptance. Dr. Laura C. Schlessinger, June 1998. It's a long introduction. Couple more pages. There are many roads to Rome. Jerusalem. I could have written the above paragraph, although my religious journey was quite different from Dr. Schlesinger's. I was born into a family who practiced some Jewish observance. We did not observe the fundamental commandments like Shabbat and the dietary laws of keeping kosher, which are part of the overall call to holiness, but I grew up experiencing the warmth and joy of celebrating major Jewish holidays and life cycle events. I did not have a Jewish awakening, since Judaism was the assumption of my existence. To ask why am I Jewish was to ask why do I breathe. I was proud to be Jewish and proud of my history. The downside of being born Jewish is that Jews often take their Jewishness for granted, whereas converts like Dr. Schlesinger virtually explode with enthusiasm and serious commitment, sometimes making an uneasy relationship between the groups. In our society, an example of our taking Jewishness for granted occurs at the bar, or bat for girls, mitzvah. A bar mitzvah, literally meaning son of the commandment, is the Jewish rite of passage indicating the adult status of responsibility celebrated at age 13. The newly designated adult is obligated to observe the laws whether one celebrated at bar mitzvah ceremony or not. The status of obligated adult was automatic. The ceremony is simply a public statement that the man, woman, child was old enough to know right from wrong and was accountable to the law. For most American Jews, the bar mitzvah does not have the significance and is instead a social religious ceremony representing the successful completion of religious studies and a public demonstration of Jewish pride. The truth is that 13 is actually too young to understand the significance of religious responsibilities, and that this ceremony is too often viewed as the honorable discharge from Jewish study and involvement. That is how I celebrated my bar mitzvah, a ceremony of Jewish pride but not religious commitment. In the Jewish tradition, understanding the reason for specific laws, customs, and rituals helps to make their observance more meaningful, but that background is not essential for the observance itself. My great grandparents, who were very religious, did not know the reasons for all the things they did. It didn't matter to them. They did Jewish things because that is what Jews did. Was it their deep faith in God that motivated this attitude, or was it blind obedience to the only way they knew? I would like to believe that it was their faith in God and a way of life that had been part of the Jewish people for 4,000 years. Theirs was a generation that did not challenge authority. I am a product of a generation that challenges all authority, a generation for which doubt and rebellion have replaced faith and belief. These powerful forces which helped a nation question and overthrow that status quo of racism and openly protest a questionable war, Vietnam, have also led to a general decline in organized religious affiliation. Instead, we live in a country yearning for spirituality, a search for comfort and meaning. We want the benefits of God without the obligations. Ultimately, the modern New Age movements are simply placebos, feeling better without necessarily being better. My Polish-born maternal grandparents demonstrated a great love for Judaism. I have vivid and beautiful memories of attending prayer services with my grandfather. I had learned the words of the prayers in religious school, and I could see the devotion of my grandfather's praying, but I could not feel the prayers. The words of the Psalm 51:17, O Lord, open my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise, did not make sense until I began my search for God. Only then did I realize that this was an appeal to God to help us transform a prayer of our lips into a prayer of our hearts. Through literally hundreds of informal surveys with Jewish audiences, I have discovered that most Jewish families do not talk about God. Sure, parents must answer the questions of their young children, like where is God or what does God look like, but the answers are brief and tenuous. As a rabbi, I have come to learn that many Jewish adults are uncomfortable with their own views of God, and hence the subject has become taboo. I grew up in such a house, and in their turn, so did my parents. This was the culture of theological dysfunction and that defined my pre-rabbinic life. Given this, how or why would I ever become a rabbi? I became a rabbi because my passion for Judaism compensated for my theological uncertainty. I believed in a God of creation, but not much more. It was a beginning. During the 10 years of functioning as a rabbi, of seeing God at work in my life and the lives of my congregants, I have come to believe in a more personal God. Whereas most people see life through their own eyes and those of a select group of family and friends, as a rabbi, I experience life through the eyes of almost 1,000 families from birth to death, 365 days of the year. By virtue of being a rabbi, participating in the lives of all those individuals and families, I have the distinction of seeing more of life than the average person. I believe that God is active in our lives. I cannot see the hands of God at work, but I can see and feel his presence in the creation of the unfolding design of the infinitely complicated and wondrous nature and experience of life. To believe in God is to believe that humans are more than accidents of nature. It means that we are endowed with purpose by a higher source and that our goal is to realize that higher purpose. If each of us creates his own meaning, we also create our own morality. I cannot believe this, for if so, what the Nazis did was not immoral because German society had accepted it. Likewise, the subjective morality of every majority culture throughout the world could validate their heinous behavior. It comes down to a very simple matter. Without God, there is no objective meaning to life, nor is there an objective morality. I do not want to live in a world where right and wrong are subjective. At age 15, after a youth trip to Israel inspired me to begin my Jewish journey, I began to observe some of the basic commandments. I did so with little support from my Jewish friends, since for them their Jewishness was a cultural ethnic identity more than a daily experience of format for holiness. I finally understood the purpose of religion is to lead us to holiness, a relationship with God, and an aspiration of living up to being made in the image of God. I'm going to read that again. I finally understood the purpose of religion is to lead us to holiness, a relationship with God, and an aspiration of living up to being made in the image of God. With that goal in mind, I came to realize that observing the Sabbath, kosher laws, ritual prayers, and other obligated observances were not a burden of prohibitions, but a way of developing godliness in all my words, thoughts, and deeds. During my admission interviews for rabbinical school, I was asked why I wanted to become a rabbi. Though I do not remember my exact answer, it involved demonstrating to Jewish youth that Judaism could be a vibrant, dynamic, and integral part of one's life. Not until several years after my ordination did I understand the internal drive that led me to be a rabbi was of a more personal nature. When I began to share with congregants my love of Judaism, I finally realized that the times in my life when I felt most complete, fulfilled, and connected to family and community were the Jewish moments. My Jewish growth and eventual ordination were simply a desire to fill my life with those Jewish moments, sharing them with others, and our communal as well as personal efforts to connect with God. The choice of a rabbinical school forced me to resolve another religious conflict. What was the nature of my obligation to God? Could I choose which of the commandments I wished to observe, or was I obligated to all of them? Were the commandments actually God-mandated behaviors or meaningful folkways? I was uncomfortable with some Jewish denominations' philosophies of appointing the individual with the right to be final arbiter. I had faith in the human ability to reason, but I also knew the human tendency to rationalize unethical behavior. After a great deal of personal struggle, I eventually accepted the authority of the commandments as binding. I could now celebrate God, not the stern, judgmental God often emphasized in religion, but rather the judge from whom authority and all goodness emanates. In my personal spiritual evolution, I finally was as Jacob awakening from his dream sleep. Surely the Lord is present in this place, and I did not know. Genesis 28:16. As a rabbi, I am the spiritual leader of my synagogue and a religious representative of the Jewish faith. I preach and teach to many people who have the same sense of theological dysfunction as I had 15 years ago, but have yet to take religion seriously enough to resolve their conflicts. Although people come to me for answers, most often they are not interested in what God has to say through the Bible and rabbinic writings. After 10 years as rabbi, I find myself talking more and more about God and less about feeling good about oneself. I hope to inspire them to search out God, not just a God who can make them feel good, but a God who can help them do good. It was a long journey, but I am now more at peace with God than ever before. I still question the ways of God. It is in my blood. From Abraham, who argued with God about the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah, to Job, who could not understand why his life was filled with tragedy, my faith was taught me to challenge God. When a child struggles to understand the ways of a parent, the struggle turns into a dialogue. Once the role of the parent is accepted, although there are still many more questions than there are answers, it is possible to find God in the questions as well as in the answers. Rabbi Stewart, Vogel, June 1998. That's the end of introduction. And get on to reading chapter 1 in the next video. God bless you. God bless your family. Keep coming back and have a wonderful, wonderful, godly, blessed day. Keep it in your sneaker.